Welcome back to Urban America Horror, and if you're new here, welcome too. As always, if you have your own story to share in the next episode, send it to Urban America Horror or email us. You can find the details in the description below. I'd love to feature your story right here. After all, it's stories like yours that keep this show alive and spooky every day. Now be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're new and ready for more creepy and truly weird stuff. I keep receiving 911 calls for emergencies that haven't happened yet. I know that another call is coming today. I don't know when and I don't know why, but it will. They have been the only constant in the chaotic maelstrom of decision and consequence that has been the last few weeks of my life. Oddly reassuring, knowing I can look forward to them, yet completely powerless to know exactly when they will occur, or more importantly, what I should do about them. Any doubt is gone. I have seen too many things to believe it is just some trick or coincidence. I don't want to believe, but I have to now. I know I have a responsibility to do something. I just don't know what that is most of the time. I am tired and overwhelmed, but someone has to do something, and that someone is me. I was chosen to know what will happen and given the burden of stopping it, or just bearing witness. I suppose I understand how ignorance can be bliss now. Sorry, I should elaborate and tell you what has been happening to me these last few weeks. I know it might sound crazy, but bear with me. The first call was 2 weeks ago. I was just getting off work and had to take care of something that was equal parts annoying and expensive. I needed to pick up a new phone since I managed to completely break my old Galaxy by dropping it the day before. The screen shattered, of course, but worse, some damage to the internal components completely broke it, and it would not boot up or do anything other than display a blank screen. As I was about to head out to purchase my new device, the seemingly dead phone sprang to life and started ringing. Not with my own ringtone, but a strange chime I had not heard before, and was not sure if it was even in the list of pre-programmed ringtones. I was confused how it could still ring, but was momentarily relieved, since I figured it might still work after all. I could not really afford anything better at the moment anyway, so if I could, I would save the expense. Putting aside the decision to keep my shattered phone a while longer or not, I answered the call. I was surprised and disturbed when before I could even say hello, and panic-stricken voice cut me off. Help! Oh God, please help, someone stabbed him. They stabbed Michael. Please send help. It sounded like someone was trying to call the emergency line, and somehow it got sent to my broken phone. I was confused and I tried to explain to the distraught person on the phone that I was not emergency services. I am sorry. I know it sounds like a real emergency there, but you need to dial 911 and get help. I don't know who this is and I can't track the location. This is a personal cell phone, not 911. Before I could try and explain more, I was cut off. What do you mean? I did call 911, I need help. Someone stole our car and stabbed my boyfriend, Michael. We need help now. Get a real dispatcher or something, please. He is losing so much blood. We need help now. We are near the park on, what was it? She paused, likely confirming the address. We are on 4th Avenue and Beckett Street. I think please send help. I did not know what I could do. I had tried to suggest they call 911, but they sounded sure that they had. I did not know how to tell the panicked woman that I couldn't help. I finally decided on a plan and told her, all right, ma'am, try and stay calm. I will try and call emergency services myself and send them there. Please try and call 911 again over there and see if it routes you correctly so someone can help. What can I tell them your name is? There was a pause and the voice on the other line spoke again. It's Kendra. Kendra. What? Static interrupted her response, and after a moment, the line went dead. I tried to call 911, but after that call, my dead phone had died once again, and it was unable to make even an emergency call. I hoped that whoever that Kendra woman was got hold of emergency services. I had no idea how I had gotten the call, but either way they really needed help, and I sure was not an EMT. I thought they likely got through since I did not get another call, but the more I thought about it, the more concerned and responsible I felt. I considered the location she gave. I knew that park. It was not too far from where I was, so I figured I would go and check and make sure that they got through to 911 and someone was there on scene to help. I drove out to the park and found the corner of the park by 4th and Beckett. Not many people were around since it was fairly late in the evening. Certainly no signs of a stabbing or carjacking on this street corner. Since no one was around, I started thinking that maybe I had been the victim of a prank and that no one was here. It might have just been some elaborate crank call meant to rile people up about emergencies for some kind of sick entertainment. I felt upset by being fooled, but also relieved that no one was really in trouble, and I decided to head home. The Verizon store was closed by that point, so I would have to try again tomorrow. I stuffed the Verizon coupon I had saved and hoped would help discount a new phone for me back into my pocket. Having scribbled the address that Kendra had given me on the back of the paper, I started to feel silly for having gone out there. The next evening after work, I was planning to go buy the overpriced replacement for my phone again. As I got into my car to leave, I fumbled in my pocket for the coupon I had received and had written the address from the prank call the day before on. It was not there. My heart sank. It was a coupon for $100 off on a new Galaxy phone, which, considering how much they cost, was not a huge percentage, and I would have to finance it anyway. Still, $100 was $100. I still had a while before the store closed, so I decided to check back by the park. I thought maybe I may have dropped it there when I had gotten out to look for the so-called crime scene. It was a stupid idea, I knew that. I figured that unless someone was going to buy a phone, they might not have picked it up, and it could still be there. I drove back to where I had been the previous night. There were more people around this time. A few joggers, some bike riders, and people walking the trail. I parked and got out of my car and started looking near where I had been standing the night before. The whole idea was stupid, but if it could save me a bit of money, I would go for it. As expected, after fumbling around for a few minutes, I could not find the paper anywhere, and I started walking back to my car. I saw a young couple walking hand in hand back to the parking lot as well. They had arrived back at their car, and the gentleman opened the door for his lady. I thought the gesture was very sweet, which made the next few moments even more horrifying. As he closed the door and started to the driver's side, a figure dressed in all black jumped out of the nearby bushes and shouted at the man. I couldn't make out the words from where I was, but he was holding something, and when the gentleman reached into his pocket, the figure in black lunged forward and attacked. He seemed to stab the gentleman several times, and I heard a scream from the woman who had just emerged from their car. She was still screaming and rushed towards the fallen man, and I thought I heard her shout, "Michael, no!" I stood there frozen, unable to act. I knew I should help, but I was paralyzed by the sudden brutality and horror of the situation. Before I could move, the man in black peeled out of the parking lot in the couple's car. They remained where they were. Her screaming continued, and she held on to him. The sound had finally snapped me out of my confused and terrified daze, and I raced over to try and help. As soon as I approached, the woman looked up at me. Her hands were covered in the man's blood, and she begged for help. "Help, call 911, he's been stabbed, my Michael, he's been stabbed." I fell back in confused shock. The voice was familiar, the name was too. That was the woman from the phone call yesterday. It sounded exactly like her. There was no mistaking it. I couldn't understand how it was all happening in that moment. My confused reverie was interrupted by the woman shouting me back to my senses. "Don't just stand there, please, we need help." I did not know how to respond, but I managed to stutter out a meek, My phone's broken. I am so sorry, maybe I can find help." As I backed away trying to figure out what to do, a jogger had happened by and raced over to help. She sat down with them and was assisting in stabilizing Michael. She had given her cell phone to the woman who seemed to be calling 911. As she finished dialing the number, I felt an odd tingling in the air, and suddenly my broken phone vibrated and a notification bell chimed. I sat there, dumbly watching everything unfold, is disbelief. After a brief delay, I heard her speak, and I was not prepared, though perhaps I should have been for what happened next. "Help! Oh God, please help, someone stabbed him. They stabbed Michael, please send help." I felt an odd thrumming of electrical energy from the phone as she spoke, and I knew what she was going to say next. "What do you mean? I did call 911. I need help. Someone stole our car and stabbed my boyfriend, Michael. We need help now. Get a real dispatcher or something, please. He is losing so much blood. We need help now. We are near the park on What was it? I unconsciously mouthed the words that followed since I had heard them less than 24 hours before. We are on 4th Avenue and Beckett Street. I think please send help. Another brief pause and then she would say her name. The buzzing and thrumming from the phone stopped moments after she said her name. It's Kendra Wallace. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? Please send someone. He is going to bleed to death, please. She continued screaming into the phone and then went back to Michael prone form, while the jogger who had come to help attempted to call emergency services again. It sounded like she had gotten through, as was giving the location to someone on the phone. When an ambulance arrived, I left the scene. I couldn't handle the insanity of what I had just experienced. How in the hell did I get a phone call about all of the things that had happened that night, the day before? I fell into my car and gripped the wheel and tried to process the insanity of what had just happened. I had no idea how any of this was possible. As I tried to keep from hyperventilating, I heard another notification on my phone. I had received a text message somehow. Despite the Messenger app not functioning, it had a message screen displayed with one unread message. I tried to see if any other apps or anything would work, and it would not navigate to anything else. The only thing I could do was to open the thread. It left me even more confused than I had been before the message just read. Come on, were you even trying? Better luck next time. See you around, M. I had so many questions. Chief among them was who the hell was M, and how did they know about what had happened? Before I had time to consider the madness of the situation, my phone started to ring again in the same weird chime from yesterday. I had a feeling I knew what would happen if I picked up. Holding my breath and steeling myself, I answered the call. The sound in the walls. I moved into the house last month. It was one of those charming old colonial homes with creaking wooden floors and ivy creeping up the walls. A dream for someone like me who always loved the idea of history clinging to every corner. The realtor mentioned it was over 100 years old, and though it needed some repairs, it felt like the perfect place to call my own. The first night in the house was quiet, almost too quiet. It's funny how you never notice the absence of sound until it's gone. I didn't hear the hum of cars in the distance, no people walking down the street, just pure silence. It should have been peaceful, but instead, it left me with a nagging feeling of unease. It started on the third night. I was lying in bed, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, when I heard a faint scratching sound. I sat up, groggy, trying to figure out where it was coming from. I thought maybe it was just a mouse or some other rodent. Old houses are prone to pests, after all. But as I listened more closely, it sounded like something bigger, something deliberate. It was coming from the walls. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was probably just an animal. Maybe a raccoon or a possum had gotten into the crawl space. But every night, the noise got worse. What started as a faint scratching soon turned into what sounded like whispering. It was so faint I couldn't make out the words, but there was something disturbingly human about it. I called an exterminator, thinking that whatever was in there needed to be dealt with. They came, searched the house, and found nothing. No signs of rodents, no nests, no entry points. They assured me there was nothing in the walls, but the sounds continued. One night, the whispering grew louder. I sat up in bed, heart racing, straining to hear. I couldn't deny it anymore. The voices were there, just behind the wall of my bedroom, and they were speaking. Words slurred together in low, guttural tones, too quiet to understand but unmistakably there. Then, something tapped against the wall. It was slow, methodical, like someone knocking from the other side. I jumped out of bed and pressed my ear to the wall, trying to hear. The whispering stopped, and for a moment, there was silence again. But then the wall shifted. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like something inside the wall moved, something alive. I could feel the vibrations under my hand, like a deep, hidden pulse. My stomach churned, and I backed away slowly, afraid to look away but terrified of staying too close. I hardly slept that night. The next day, I called a contractor to check the walls, hoping it was just faulty wiring or some structural issue. He tore open part of the wall where I'd heard the noise, but all he found was the usual. Wood, insulation, nothing out of the ordinary. He patched it up, and I pretended for a while that it was enough to make me feel safe. That night, I decided to record the sounds. I left my phone on with a voice recording app running, propped up against the wall where the sounds had been the loudest. I lay in bed, the sheets pulled tight around me, and waited. The whispering returned, but this time it was clearer. The words still made no sense, like they were spoken in a language I couldn't understand. But as I listened through the thin walls, I realized something horrifying. The voices weren't just random. They were responding to me. They would grow louder when I moved and quiet when I stayed still. At one point, I couldn't take it anymore. I shouted, "What do you want?" The whispering stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the pounding of my heart. Then a single word came through the wall, clear as day. You. I froze. The air in the room felt thick and oppressive, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I grabbed my phone, too scared to play back the recording, and ran out of the house. I've been staying in a hotel ever since, but I can still hear the whispering in my dreams. I know I have to go back eventually. It's my home after all. But I don't know if I can, because whatever is in the walls wants me, and I don't know how to stop it. I got invited to an obscure experimental concert. It changed my life forever. I saw another one today. It was spray painted above the entrance to a sewer, along with an arrow pointing downward into the darkness. 20 years later, MVSH is finally back in town. MVSH. 4 little letters. I know it's stupid to be scared of them, just as I know that no one is likely to remember me as the person I was 20 years ago. None of that helps when the memories come flooding back. The summer I turned 17, my life was about music. Grimy basement mosh pits, drunken field concerts where the amps were plugged into some survivalist's gas generator, night drives with the windows down and the radio blaring. A part-time job at Sundown Records paid bums to buy beer for me and kept my gas tank needle half an inch from empty. My parents bit their nails about my future, but I didn't care. Why shouldn't life just go on like this forever? Working at Sundown Records had another perk as well. I got to spend time with Dylan Fuse. He was a big name in the local underground scene, and his music shop reflected it. The walls were covered with the concert flyers of bands he'd discovered and made great. The high-end sound system played only music that met his own exacting standards. My interview at Sundown was just to listen to 3 songs and tell Dylan what I thought of them. When I told him I thought they all sucked, a polished white smile flashed across his face. He put his crocodile skin shoes up on his desk and told me that the job was mine if I wanted it. Dylan gave me tips on all the most exclusive shows, even let me borrow albums from the shop. He was charming, he was worldly, and unlike the boys in my high school, he actually knew how to dress himself. It wasn't long before I was head over heels in love with him. That was how it started. I was breaking down cardboard boxes in the hallway beside his office when the phone rang. My heart skipped a beat. Nobody dared to call Dylan after 5 p.m., not unless it was an emergency. I still remember the giddiness in Dylan's voice when I pressed my ear against the door to eavesdrop. "Really? They are? I'll be there." Dylan burst out into the hallway just as I got back to my heap of cardboard. "Big news, V," he was yelling. "MVSH is playing this weekend." I'd missed a key word in there. It had sounded like his mouth had suddenly filled up with half-chewed meat. Dylan rolled his eyes at my blank expression. Apparently, MVSH was the hottest thing on the scene right now. No one knew who the band members were, where they were from, or even how to pronounce their group's name. MVSH didn't even sell tickets to their concerts. The only way in was to show up with a specific food item. It served as proof that you had been told about the show by someone close to the band. I nodded along to Dylan's story, not trusting myself to speak. When I was alone with him, my words tangled themselves into stupid, humiliating knots. I always wound up talking to my shoes, and half the time I had no idea what I had actually said to him. I was thinking about how unfair that was when I realized that Dylan had just invited me to go see MVSH with him. Sure, I guess I finally managed to shrug. My boss must have seen right through my attempt to look careless. There was a sneer on his face as he peered out into the shop. He wanted to make sure no one overheard what he was about to say next. I got goosebumps as he leaned in close and whispered, "Well then, there are a few other things you're going to need to know." I had it all planned out. I waited until my father had finished 3/4 of his coffee and reached the sports section of the newspaper before I asked him if I could stay over with my friend Sarah on Friday night. We had a biology exam on Monday, I lied, and Sarah wanted to study together. My father glanced up sharply and I knew I was busted. I had been an idiot to suggest that I cared about school. He knew me better than that. He gazed out the window, brushed some crumbs off of his tie and sighed. "Sure, honey. You can go, but you're bringing Raquel." Trying to hide the horrified expression on my face, I gave him a quick hug and bolted out the door. This was going to ruin everything. The difference between my sister Raquel and I was clear just by looking at our notebooks. Hers were neat, detailed, each perfectly shaped letter contained inside the lines. Mine were jumbled and chaotic, filled with stickers, doodles, and my friends' phone numbers. If I tried to leave Raquel alone at Sarah's, she would rat me out for sure. My only option was to bring her to see MVSH as my guest, and hope that I could convince her to follow Dylan's bizarre instructions. The afternoon before the concert, we raided the heaps of donated clothes in the Methodist church basement. We were searching for the ugliest, filthiest stuff we could find. Dylan said that MVSH didn't let anyone in unless they looked like they had been sleeping in a dumpster for a few weeks. I told Raquel that we could throw everything away after the concert anyway. Gross. My sister made a face. I took a deep breath and did my best to explain to Raquel that seeing MVSH live was a life-changing experience. Did she really think that Dylan Hughes would be wrong about something like that? If she did, she kept her mouth shut about it, finally settling on a pair of paint-splattered khaki pants and a greasy orange t-shirt. The jeans and tuxedo vest that I'd picked out for myself were in tatters, but at least they fit me and, sort of, matched. I was especially proud of a leather belt I'd discovered in a dusty corner beneath some trash bags. Its steel buckle was brick-heavy and handmade in the shape of a grinning skull. Now there was just one last stop to make before we caught a bus to the location that Dylan had given me. "What's with the soup?" Raquel asked later when she saw me pocketing 2 packets of bouillon cubes at the mini-mart across from the bus station. I repeated Dylan's instructions. When you go to a MVSH concert, you've got to bring something that shows you know somebody cool. You know, like a password. This time it's chicken soup cubes. We got lucky. Dylan says that one year it was oatmeal, and last time it was pig's blood. "Hey," Raquel hurried after me, whispering, "You're going to pay for that, right?" I got us a coin locker across from some broken down payphones. As we stored our stuff, I reminded Raquel that she couldn't bring anything into the show with her. No wallet, no phone, nothing. "For punks, these guys sure have a lot of rules," Raquel complained, but handed over her shoulder bag anyway. When the bus arrived, Raquel sat in the front seat, her spine straight and her hands folded neatly in her lap. I lounged beside her, drumming my fingers impatiently on the windows and hoping she wouldn't realize how nervous I was. I had assumed that Dylan would be fine with me inviting one extra person, but what if he wasn't? Our stop was near the end of the line, its crazily leaning sign barely visible in the amber streetlight glow. I was expecting some gritty industrial club with steel shutters and a line of leather-clad hipsters at the door, but the sidewalk was empty. The factories and warehouses looming over us were either closed down or partly demolished. Mangy cats prowled through the weed-choked lots. The only sign of life was a pair of white semi-trucks backed up against one of the decrepit buildings. For the first time, I found myself doubting my boss's intentions. What if Dylan was just toying with me? What if the whole thing was just some kind of cruel joke? Raquel and I slipped through a gap in a chain-link fence, then turned down a blind alley. At the far end, MVSH was spray-painted above a rusted factory door. A crowd had already started to gather. Their clothes were just ragged as ours, and there was a packet of bouillon cubes in every hand. I spotted Dylan's silky smooth hair right away. We had made it. As my boss approached, that feeling of relief vanished. Without his expensive clothes and soft lighting of the record shop, Dylan looked old. He licked his lips when he saw me, and suddenly I wanted to puke. I wondered what an adult man was doing inviting a teenage girl to an event like this, then wondered why it had taken me so long to ask that question in the first place. The hungry expression on his face soured when he saw Raquel at my side. "Who's this?" "My sister Raquel. I specifically told you that there's only one invite per guest." "Right, you invited me and I invited my sister." I found myself getting angry on Raquel's behalf. Who did Dylan think he was? She had just as much of a right to be here as anyone else. "If it's a problem, we can just leave." No problem." Dylan clearly still thought he had a chance. He looked at Raquel's outfit and snorted. "Just act like you don't know me when you get to the door, okay?" "That won't be hard," Raquel snorted. There was a sarcastic edge to her voice that I had never heard before, and it occurred to me that maybe my sister was more than just the whiny teacher's pet that I had always believed her to be. Maybe during these long years of high school, she had changed too. A breeze blew down the alley, carrying dust, ripped up plastic bags, and soggy newspaper pages. One of them stuck to Dylan's pants, and he pried it off with 2 fingers as though it were some disgusting laboratory experiment. "So do these guys always keep their audience waiting forever?" Raquel asked. "Or are we special?" Dylan, usually so glib and sarcastic in his office, suddenly had nothing to say. At the far end of the alley, the factory door opened with a metallic screech. We all clapped, even Raquel, but our cheers died in our throats when we saw the 6 hulking figures that walked out of it. If they were bouncers, they were the most intimidating security team that I had ever seen. It wasn't just how eerily similar they all looked, with their bald heads and pale skin. It wasn't even how large they were. It was their eyes. There was no emotion in them at all. The 6 of them were surveying the crowd like we were cattle waiting to be processed. I had been to concerts with sketchy security, sometimes motorcycle gangs or ex-convicts, but this was different. Something was wrong. Before I could express what I was feeling to Raquel, the line started to move. The 6 strangers were even more disturbing up close. Something about their pasty skin reminded me of cold porridge or graying meat left out to spoil. Their outfits were made of stitched-together strips of ragged old clothing that looked a lot like ours. 2 of them were scanning the concert-goers with metal detecting wands. Raquel gripped my arm. "I have a phone," she whispered. "What?" I snapped. I wasn't worried about not getting in. I was concerned about what those pale strangers might do to us if we gave them an excuse to do it. Dylan had made it clear that MVSH was ruthless about enforcing their weird rules, and if they dragged us out of line here in an industrial wasteland far from any help, anything might happen. Dad said I couldn't go unless I brought it. I bit my lip and held out my hand to Raquel. "Hand it over." Using Dylan's broad back as cover, I slipped my sister's cell phone down the front of my pants. If it triggered the metal detectors, I could just point to the steel belt buckle that was covering it. They wouldn't investigate further, I hoped. The closer we got to the 6 of them, the less confident I felt. Those beady black eyes never seemed to blink, and there was a smell to them, something irony and astringent that I couldn't quite identify. Raquel looked over her shoulder at me as rough hands separated us. Their metal detecting wands moved over our bodies. Raquel disappeared through the lightless factory door, just as my belt buckle set off a horrible electronic whine. The large figure in front of me pointed wordlessly at it. Forcing my mouth into a sheepish smile, I took the buckle off for closer inspection. As I did, I shook the phone further down my pant leg. The strangers passed the buckle around, then handed it back to me. Their metal detectors passed over my hips and thighs, but there was nothing there to trigger them anymore. Looking almost disappointed, they waved me through. I couldn't see anything, but from the way the crowd pressed up against me, I guessed we were in some kind of corridor. I called out to Raquel, but she didn't respond. I had an awful feeling that if I stopped or stubbled, I would be trampled to death by a mass of shuffling hipster feet. Everyone had gotten over the shock of the 6 strangers at the door. People murmured and shoved each other forward, eager to see what MVSH had in store for them next. We filed out into a much larger space, and stage lights came on above. It was a sort of square room that had been set up on the factory floor, with solid metal walls that were about 3 times my height. The stage hung overhead, casting fractured shadows onto the excited faces around me. When MVSH walked out on stage, the applause was scattered. The band members were the same 6 grim, burly figures who had been working security outside. What the hell was going on? A hairy hand squeezed my shoulder and I jumped. Dylan was right behind me. He kept jabbing his finger at the walls and shouting something, but the band had already started playing. I couldn't have heard him even if I'd wanted to. It was easy to lose him in the crowd. Dylan had been right about one thing. I had never heard anything like MVSH before. When they began their first set, the droning buzz felt like I had stuck my head into a hornet's nest. The chug, chug, chug of the bass reminded me unnervingly of chomping teeth. People glanced at the faces around them, unsure. Was this really the band we had all gone through so much trouble to see? Despite their doubts, the crowd began to dance along to the music, probably hoping, like I was, that what we were hearing was just a build-up to something less disturbing. I bounced and swayed along with the rest of them. I wanted to lose myself in the music, to forget about the sense of unease that Dylan's wild-eyed expression had left me with. I kept seeing the same face as I moved through the audience, which was more tightly packed than ever, but there was no sign of Raquel. That nagging sense of wrongness was getting stronger and stronger. About half the crowd was loving it, or at least they had convinced themselves that they were. They slam danced in a sweaty, frenzied mosh pit just below the stage, oblivious to the creeping claustrophobia that the rest of us felt. That was where I finally spotted Raquel, spinning her wet hair and pumping one fist above her head. She was having the time of her life. The hipster beside me bumped into me. He blinked, wiped water from his expensive glasses confusedly, then turned back to the band. It didn't make sense. We had both been standing still. No one had slammed into us or forced us to collide with one another, which left only one explanation. The room was somehow getting smaller. Was that what Dylan had meant when he had pointed to the walls? That they were moving somehow? Squeezing through all those slimy bodies to reach my sister probably took just a few minutes, but it felt like it took hours. Raquel threw her arms around me. I wasn't sure what she was screaming, but from her big grin, I understood that she was thanking me for bringing her here. Her smile faded when she saw the worried look on my face, the way I kept pointing away from the stage. I tugged on Raquel's arm, but her slick skin slipped right through my fingers. She shook her head, and her disgusted glare showed me exactly what she was thinking. She had spent all those years studying, all those years being the good daughter while I went out and had fun, and now I was trying to drag her away from her first night out. Raquel shoved me away and started dancing harder than ever. The soup-reeking water was almost knee-high and rising. Up on stage, MVSH hammered on their instruments. Did they even know how to play them? Or were they just making as much noise as possible to cover the rumble of the engines hidden inside the walls? By the time Raquel and the rest of the audience realized what was happening, it would be too late. Sticky flesh and wet clothing pressed in on me from all sides. The claustrophobic feeling made me want to scream, and eventually, that's exactly what I did. My shrieking became so loud that I could almost hear it over the music, but nobody nearby paid me any attention. They were convinced that this was what they had come here to see. No matter how much I squirmed, I just couldn't move. Only when the pressure had pushed my belt buckle so deeply into my skin that it hurt did I think of the phone I had smuggled in with me. I twisted my arm until I could reach into my jeans and pull it free. The rectangular screen glowed like a lighthouse beacon on the dim dance floor. The band stopped playing. An angry cry rose from all sides. I had broken MVSH's rules. Through the wall of irritated faces, I caught a glimpse of Raquel, looking more furious than any of them. Someone swatted at the device in my hand, and suddenly I was being shoved, lifted, pulled in all directions by a mob of strangers. I kept a death grip on the phone, fighting to punch 3 digits into the screen, 911. One of the MVSH members grabbed some long, cruel-looking tool that reminded me of a noose on a pole. It closed around my neck, dragging me backwards over all those angry, anonymous hands onto the stage. I clawed helplessly at the rubber cord that was cutting off my air supply. The audience cheered. "Please let me go," I whimpered. 911, what's your emergency? A cheery voice blared from the phone speaker. The crowd fell silent. The MVSH members looked at each other. One grabbed me by the arm and dragged me off stage. The others picked up their instruments, ready to continue their performance. Hello? This is 911. Please state your emergency. The operator's words echoed eerily from the abandoned factory walls. I was being taken back out the corridor we had walked in through, toward the alley door. The MVSH member tightened his grip around my bicep until I thought my arm would snap in half. He hadn't said a word, but the message was clear. He could beat me to death a long time before the police could arrive. Remain on the line, and first responders will... Oh, geez, I apologized. I must have called by accident. I am so sorry. I hope the operator couldn't hear the quaver in my voice. There was a pause. Are you sure you're all right, ma'am? No, I'm fine. I think I just rolled over in bed and hit a bunch of numbers on my phone, I lied. I'm not going to get in trouble for this, am I? I mean, I'm still a teenager. The grip on my arm loosened and I backed out the rusted door. The MVSH member let me go but stayed within arm's reach, ready to pounce if I broke our unspoken deal. Not this time, ma'am, but you need to be more careful in the future. Click. The MVSH member's black eyes glared at me expressionlessly. I continued backing away, holding the glowing screen out in front of me like a magic amulet. I was ready to hit redial if he tried anything, and we both knew it. I have a sister in there, I began. If you could tell her. Another MVSH member came running out of the shadows, carrying that awful pole in his hands. I turned to run and felt the whoosh of the pole as it swept over my head and slammed into my wrist. Pain exploded in my hand. Raquel's phone shattered on the asphalt. I expected to hear chasing footsteps behind me, but instead the steel-shuttered door slammed shut. It was like the pair had never been there at all. Deep within the guts of that abandoned factory, the concert was still going on, its unsuspecting audience being pressed tighter and tighter until... What? Until they were all crushed alive while the band played on above? I didn't want to think about it because somewhere in that crowd was my sister. My wet clothes stuck to my skin, reeking of chicken broth and reminding me of what was happening back there. I had to get help, but finding my way through the winding alleys between the warehouses was taking forever. And even once I got back to the road, there was no one passing through this derelict district so late at night. Caught somewhere between exhaustion and panic, I waved my arms at anyone that passed by. The first car didn't stop, neither did the second. After what felt like hours, a grizzled 50-something in a pickup truck pulled off the road, but he kept his hand on a glove-box pistol just in case. He didn't have a cell phone, but he would take me as far as a gas station where I could make a call. By the time my garbled story got out and the police closed in on the factory, it was almost dawn. MVSH, the two white semi-trucks, and their audience had vanished. With so many sudden disappearances, I had imagined that the case would make national news. But none of the journalists my family contacted were interested. After a while, I began to see their point. A traveling band that crushes its audience into goo? Not even the weirdest tabloids would consider running a story like that. The police said nothing about my sister's disappearance, only reassuring us that the investigation was ongoing. I started doing some digging of my own, and what I found was bizarre. Despite being such a supposedly phenomenal band, there was almost no information about MVSH online. What little there was got taken down almost as soon as it appeared. But even so, it was clear that I wasn't the only one who had lost a loved one to their deadly concerts. Someone on an anonymous forum claimed to have seen MVSH carrying plastic sacks of pink sludge into their white semi-trucks after one of their shows. Someone else said she found a heap of ripped, discarded clothing in the woods near where MVSH had performed. 2 days into my search, I began to receive bizarre, threatening messages. They were nothing but a jumble of letters and numbers, but scattered inside the chaos were eerie details. The name of the drink I had ordered at the coffee shop that morning, the address of the friend whose apartment I'd visited the night before. After that came the phone calls. There was never any voice on the other end of the line, only a bunch of garbled noise and screams. It was the sound of a MVSH concert. As soon as I stopped investigating MVSH, the messages and phone calls stopped. Did I want to know what had really happened to my sister? Sure, but not enough to die for it. I learned to live with the past. I went back to school, eventually getting a doctorate in literature and taking a teaching position at a forgettable college in the Southeast. Bands don't even come through this state while they're on tour, much less this unimportant town. And yet 2 days ago, the music professor approached me in the cafeteria with an excited sparkle in his eye. A super experimental band was coming to town, he explained. One so exclusive that didn't even charge tickets for entry. All we had to do was bring a few spice packets, and they would put on a show that would change our lives forever. Thanks for tuning in to today's horror story. If you have a horror, mystery, or haunting story you'd like to share, send it to us at Urban America Horror. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here waiting for your next horror story.